that was really hurtful to hear that my then second grader was having an issue with a child saying, I don't believe in Black Lives Matter.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. All right, everyone. So my guest today is the lovely Sara. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to hear your story. But first, for everyone who does not know you like I know you, which is really well, can you introduce yourself for me?
Of course. So I am a mom, teacher, creator, really awesome friend. And I'm kind of
True
just
story.
trying to figure out life and be who I am as a human, apart from being an educator, being a parent, because I feel like those roles consumed me in a way that I finally had to start recognizing that I was a person before those things. And I am a person in addition to those things. And those things weren't the
Mm,
only pieces that defined me. So that's sort of what my journey's been all about, and helping other people recognize that they're not alone in this parenting journey. Parenting is really hard. And for those of you who are parents, you know that it comes with all these challenges that are not written in any of the books that claim to be the guidebooks to parenting, that don't actually fit for everyone. And so it's kind
true.
of been a long journey. I started around the time of COVID with a podcast, because what else was I going to do during the time when I was home, educating my children from home and teaching from home? I had a lot of time because I wasn't going anywhere after what would have been work hours. So I ended up finally deciding to dive into my creative side and kind of reignite some pieces that were missing for a long time. They sort of lay dormant for a while. And I started
Okay.
the Raising Legacies podcast, where I had guests like your lovely self, Reesa, and I had other people on sharing their stories specific to parenthood. Each family's challenges were different because their situations were different. So whether they became parents by circumstance, or they became parents through adoption, or by choice, or they were independent parents, everyone had a different story to share. So that is sort of what got me working publicly on using my voice to connect with people and let people know that they were not alone. I sort of took a break from the podcast itself and am still working on some other projects, specifically in writing right now. And I will share some of those things as I progress further in them. Right now, they're sort of in some premature stages, but I have published a couple of books as well. And I have tried to connect my audience with stories of either my own, my children's, or a combined experience that will relate to people whose stories are not often told in books. And that's sort of
Okay.
where I am going now.
Very cool. So, any of the stuff that our readers might be interested in or might be useful or beneficial, shameless plug, where can we find them? How can we find your book? Tell us more.
So you can find me on Instagram or on Facebook, Raising Legacies podcast. And my podcast is everywhere that podcasts are heard. So you can catch all of those episodes that I've done. You can also reach out to Raising Legacies podcast at gmail.com, especially if you have a story that you'd like to share, as I start to plan toward recording episodes this fall. That would be, I'm always looking for people to share their parenting stories specifically. And I have currently 2 books and then several notebooks and journals that are available on Amazon. You can look under author Sara Hall, which is a super common name. So you may want to go directly from the link that I will share with Reesa, that you can find both my journals and the books that I've published. One of the books that I have is actually in Spanish. It's called Dos Navidades, and it was written to tell a story of a teenager who was experiencing his first Christmas with divorced parents. So it was actually
Mm,
2 Christmases, and sort of what some of the pain came along with that, and sort of what the experience did for him. And it turned out to be one of those things that I didn't know that I needed to write that story, but it was something that
Okay.
I was working on with my children for them to tell a story that they could connect to when I was initiating the separation from their father. And then the other one was a partnership with my oldest son. It's called Two Homes, and it was written for very young children to understand that there is some normalization in having two homes where
Mm.
parents are separated or parents were never married in the first place, but you get to spend time at each one. And the common denominator is the love that your parents have for you and how you should celebrate that. It gives a perspective of like, here's what happens at my mom's house, here's what happens at my dad's house, and how the experiences are sort of parallel, but they're not the same. And so then it comes back to the whole, but both of my parents love me, and it's a great one. The reason that I love that one so much is because Dante was actually my illustrator. So he was
Okay.
8 years old at the time, and he drew the pictures for it, and it's something we really cherish because that experience was helpful for us to be able to sort of bond through some of the hardship that came along with separation, but also we don't have a traumatizing divorce situation that has happened in our home. It's been very peaceful, tranquil, loving, and the boys have not hurt from much of it, thankfully. The biggest piece was just that there was some newness surrounding
Hmm.
now going to a different place to visit daddy. So I think
Yeah.
a lot of the pain was coming from my end, thinking, what are they going to experience? What's going to happen with them? Are they going to
Hmm.
hurt from this? What do I need to do to make sure that my children don't suffer? And this was a great way for us to kind of come together in that moment. And again, it was another thing that I didn't know that I needed myself.
Wonderful. And like Sarah said, we will definitely be linking all of that in our show notes. So make sure to take a peek at those if that's something that resonates with you. So thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that piece of it, and sharing, it sounds like, your heart with us as well. So thank you. Um, okay, before we get started, because I absolutely want to hear more of your story, and I know, you've got lots of experience, and we're just going to talk just of a snippet of some of that experience today. But before we do that, can you share with us what recipe are you going to teach me today, and why did you pick this one?
So I chose Martabak, which is a Javanese egg roll from Indonesia. My father is from Indonesia, and it's one of the foods that I remember him cooking for me when I was really young and before my own parents separated. And my mom learned to cook the same food, but sometimes it was better. And that's
Okay.
all meant to have that. But it was amazing how there was a thing that I thought that only my dad could do. And my
Mm,
mom, who raised four children independently and worked two jobs and was busy a lot, one of the things that she always did was make sure that we were eating and that we were eating well. And so that was one thing that sort of stuck with me my whole life, along with the comfort that the food itself brings, because it's got that crunch and it's savory and salty, like all at one time. And it's really comforting, but it's comforting in an emotional way as well, because it was one of those staple foods in our home that was like, we're going to eat and we need everyone's coming together. It's always the dish that I pass whenever I'm invited somewhere. It's easy for
okay.
me to make, and it's a fun family experience. My boys have helped me sort of roll the egg roll wrappers up and stuff the meat, and it's a big deal across families, under like between my siblings and myself and our kiddos. So it's
Love
kind
it.
of there's a
Okay.
lot packed into it, and it's really yummy.
Yes. Okay. So with that said, I've ahead of time, so I browned our ground meat and with the garlic, with our eggs. Um, and now it sounds like, what do I do after that? I've got my scallions here. Am I mixing that? Do they go separately? Tell me more.
So you do want to mix them right into the meat. You do want to make sure that the meat cools first, because you want the onion to have its potent flavor right into the
Okay.
meat. If you cook them alongside it, some of that flavor kind of cooks into the meat, and you want it to sort of stand out separately. So you are going to mix them in. I just dump the green onions right into the meat bowl, or do you have
Okay.
it in a bowl? I can't see.
I have it in a bowl. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So just mix it right into your bowl and you can
Okay,
just kind of scoop it around. Just make sure the onions are kind of evenly spread throughout all of the meat.
perfect. Okay, so while I'm mixing this, I'd love to know. So I know today we're going to chat a little bit about the uniqueness that you have in your family, where you've got mixed babies, and kind of some of the challenges that can come up with that, that maybe other families can relate to, or maybe they've experienced themselves. I'd love to hear more about that experience and maybe some of the challenges, as well as some of just the joys that come along with that as well, and mixing cultures.
So I didn't mention before when I talked about sort of who I am. I said I was an educator. I didn't tell you what I teach. So I teach Spanish. And as I mentioned before, my father is from Indonesia. I grew up not knowing the language. And because my parents had separated, I didn't have much opportunity once I decided it was something I wanted to actually get that experience. So it was something I had to sort of start learning on my own. And I didn't do that until college. So now I'm very low in proficiency and high in interest. And so I want to learn. And that is something that I recognized in college when I was studying abroad. I was in Argentina when I realized there was a big piece of me that was missing. And it was that I hadn't connected with my culture. And in fact, when I was really young, I was sort of ashamed of the culture because I
Mm.
thought, well, my dad doesn't look like me. My dad's skin is darker than mine, and I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. I grew up in a pretty diverse community, so there were quite a bit of Latinos, and we had lots of Black people who were either coming from Haitian families or they were African Americans. There were mixes of the two, lots of people from Puerto Rico in our community, and then there was me, and there was no one who looked like me, this Asian American little girl who could be white passing, but mom is white, but dad is not. And
Hmm.
it was kind of hard to find somebody who was anything like me except my siblings. And so that piece was something that once I grew up and realized I had that, because being young, I didn't necessarily know that was a struggle for me until I got a little older and I was like, wow, like I think I could have benefited from having some representation and having some people who were like me. And I wanted to commit myself to making sure that my own children did not feel that, because no matter what, unless they found another Indonesian American man to have children with, my kids were going to look different from me. So that
Mm.
was a big piece. And when my kids were born, their father and I, just who is Black, decided that we wanted to make sure they were surrounded by diversity, that they were well educated on people who were like them, exposed to people who were different from them, but that they did have that representation available to them. The big struggles can be, I had one time at the doctor's office where I am the one who tirelessly fills out the paperwork for the kids to do all their appointments. I take them everywhere. And a doctor looked at me and asked me if I was their bio mom. And I was like, yes, I am, like proudly, but also there was something like in the notes that she was looking at. She's like, I just wanted to make sure I could ask you about this thing. But it was like, why why wouldn't I be their mom? And that piece was kind of hard for me. And I've had other times, the biggest, I think the even bigger challenge for me is when there's an experience that they're having that I can't relate to. So,
Mm.
specifically in our school district, it's a predominantly white school district, and they there are other children of color in both of their classes, but there's a lot of times where there are experiences that they're having that they can't necessarily relate to their classmates in, or they're having a different type of struggle in because their lens is different and they their lens is different from mine. And so when I try to teach them about perspective and teach them how to work through some of the challenges that come along with being mixed children in a predominantly white setting, I was, yes, a mixed children, but it was not a predominantly white setting. So our experiences are not the same in that matter. And even their father can't necessarily give them that support either because his experiences were different. So I think, and
Mm.
that's in general, I think a hard thing as a parent when you want to protect your child, you want to give them opportunity, but you also want to make sure that they have skills that they need to work through some of those pieces. And yet, since you haven't lived them yourself, you don't necessarily know what to offer and what might be
Yeah.
helpful for them. And I think that that's probably where I struggle the most, is then wanting to relate to them, helping them find who they are, but they're not going to be me, and I don't want them to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Before we go on, okay, I've got my meat mixed. Am I taking a wrapper? Can you tell me what do I do next?
So you're going to take your wrapper and you're going to turn it so that it's in a diamond shape.
Okay.
So they come in squares, the egg roll wrappers, and you want to turn it so
Mm-hmm.
that it's like a diamond. You're going to scoop. I usually take a tablespoon, but it's a generous one. And I'll
Okay.
scoop into the middle of the egg roll wrapper.
Mm-hmm.
You'll take the bottom piece that's facing you and you're going to push it forward to cover the meat.
Okay.
Then you're going to take the two side pieces and flap them in. Doesn't matter which one comes first.
Okay.
And then that top piece is, so it kind of is going to look like a house, a square with a little triangle on top. Now you're just going to roll it so that the triangle gets wrapped around the whole egg roll itself. And what I usually do is just take a small bit of warm water and dab it on my finger and use that to seal the egg roll. If you wish, you could also use like an egg wash. I've never done that, but if you find this recipe online, it will tell you to do that. I always just
Okay.
seal it with water.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'll try again. My guy split open. But continue. I'd love to hear more while I try to figure out how to perfect my rolling technique. So I heard you mention in there that, part of some of the difficulties is your lens is a little bit different. Your story, even though it is also, mixed baby yourself, it's a different story. It's a different story than their father's. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that for you folks, you sat down and said, hey, this is really important for me to provide a space that they feel seen, that they feel safe. And how are you addressing some of those things?
So this is a great question. I love it and I'm challenged by it. So one thing as a teacher, when you I've been teaching for 15 years. And so when I'm teaching, I am looking at other people's children, like, how would I want my child to be taught, right? And what would I want somebody to be doing for my child?
Mm-hmm.
And how would I want my child to respond to me? So when I'm in a classroom, I have the expectation that students will speak with me respectfully and also that they will advocate for themselves. And a big discrepancy in a classroom, especially I teach middle school, especially in the middle school, people will often think that a child speaking back at an adult is them being disrespectful. Whereas if a child is doing something that warrants uh, redirecting, and I redirect a child, but I was mistaken in what was happening, I want the child to let me know that so that I'm more aware moving forward. Other people sometimes think that that's if the adult says you're wrong, you're wrong. And
Mm.
that's absolutely not it for me. So when I had my own child come home and tell me about an experience that he had in his classroom where he had come back from the bathroom and the teacher was telling him that he needed to go and get back to work and he was wasting his time and he got a negative dojo mark because he was off task. But he told me when he got home, he didn't know what the task was, and that when he had come back from the bathroom, he had asked a friend, and the friend was telling him, but the teacher perceived him talking to the friend as him being off task. And so I spoke with him and with her about it and just sort of let Dante know that there's a way to advocate for yourself, there's a way to talk with the teacher. And if you don't know what to do, ask the adult, because sometimes when you're talking with your friends, it might not look like to a teacher that you're on task. And for me, that's a hard piece because why does my child have to make it look like he's on task if he is on task? because
Mm.
what does that mean? And does he have to look like he's on task because he's typically a problem causer in the classroom? Um, I wonder that all the time because I get negative notes sometimes and wonder, like, is this a thing that happened 4, 5, 6 times and finally the teacher was like, you're getting a mark for it? Or is this a thing where it's like first time and she's nipping it in the bud, but it's an unnecessary nipping because it wasn't something that he actually did wrong? And how do you teach a child when something is wrong in the teacher's eyes but not necessarily in the parents because of the way that the parents are raising their children or because of what the teacher considers disrespect? And so when she and I spoke about it, I let her know if he says something to you or uses a tone that is perceived disrespectful, that's absolutely not okay. But I do want you to be aware that I spoke with him about standing up for himself when he's called out for something that he did not do wrong. And there's a difference between lying about what you did wrong and he has to own it when he does mess up, but also in cases like that, he was afraid to say something because he thought that he was going to be disrespectful. And that was definitely not his aim. But I think that a lot of times teachers can look at children with an unconscious bias. And because my children are mixed in a predominantly white district, that's always a fear of mine that somebody's going to look at my child and think, you're not white. And so you're going to be causing trouble. Or with
Mm.
a stereotype that comes along, unfortunately, with being a person of color. And I hate that so much for him because another thing that his father said to me and to him during one of these conversations about behavior in the classroom was, look at the image that you are portraying right now. You know, he bought himself these like chains that he wore to school and he really liked them. His hair is currently in dreads. Most children in his school keep a short haircut, or some of the boys in his class had like longer cuts, but it was like long straight hair. So he stands out because his hair is different. And
Mm.
because of that piece, it draws a different type of attention to him. And he wants the dreads. It's a part of who he is. And he likes it. So I encourage that. And yet there's some truth to the fact that when you stand out, you don't always get the benefit of the doubt. And that's hard for me to teach to a child because as an adult, I struggle to wrap my head around it. And I have seen cases where these small things that are being addressed by teachers are being addressed toward specific children that have either the same skin tone or they are not the athletes or they are not girls or they are not boys. Like there are cultural identifiers that are 100% outside of a child's control, and yet they're what adults are using to determine who gets what treatment. And that's what I'm working as an educator to undo, but also have to sort of let my child know and have him kind of be on his guard about how people are going to perceive him as a human differently because of what he looks like. And I hate that so much because it's 2024. Why is this what we're doing? And yet it's what we're doing.
Yeah. And gosh, I mean, how have you folks gone about having that conversation with your kids? You know, when you yourself are looking at it and going, I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense in my brain. I wish I could shield this from you. At the same time, acknowledging that much of these behaviors, much of these mindsets are things that we can't physically go into someone's brain and change it and make it better. We can't make their behavior change. So, how do you have that conversation? How have you folks been kind of navigating that really, really tough place to be in?
Unfortunately, we've had to have conversations that I think are above a typical 8 and 10-year-old level of typical comprehension. Our children understand it, and I hate that they have to. We've
Mm.
been very honest with them anytime they ask a question. And also, their father has shared stories about him being profiled and pulled over because he fit the description of a crime and things like that in his car. And we don't share violent stories, but if they come up in the news and my children hear about them, we'll ask questions about what they know. They'll share what they've heard, and we'll give them as much information as we can. And then there's such an emotional piece to it that the only thing we can do is educate them on the concept of working on what we can control in those situations. And a big a big story that we shared with them was how one of my children, they both had the same shirt, but one of them had it on at school one day, and it was these two black boys, and it said Black Future on it, and it was like beautiful, like from Target. I love Target, so it was from Target. And in their section, during Black History Month, it was a shirt that was celebrating diversity, which also those shirts need to be on sale all year long, but they weren't. But I bought one. I bought one for each of them, and the one of them was wearing it to school, and he had a person in his class, a white boy, say to a friend audibly, like right in earshot of Dante, "I don't believe in Black Lives Matter." And the shirt didn't say
Mm.
Black Lives Matter, but that's
Yeah.
what he drew from that. And so Dante came home and he said, this person said this to me. How can you not believe in that? Like, it's a real thing. So we had to talk about how there are people who believe that Black Lives Matter should not exist because all lives matter. And yet they're missing the point, because Black lives need to matter as much as the other lives if we're going to say all lives matter. So the all lives can't matter until the Black ones live an equal life to their white counterparts.
Mm.
And that was hurtful for him, because he's like, this kid's supposed to be, he's my peer, he's a classmate. I don't think they were necessarily good friends. It was still relatively early in the school year when he was wearing that shirt, but still, like, they had been around each other long enough to be acquainted with one another and should be able to feel safe. They're with each other all day, every day. And that was really hurtful to hear that my then second grader was having an issue with a child saying, "I don't believe in Black Lives Matter." And my my heart broke, and I had to just kind of be very matter of fact, and also let him know that while we can't change the minds of other people, what we are in control of is how we respond to what people are saying. And what we can do with our time, with our power, with our voices, is continue to lift people up, continue to celebrate them in their differences, continue to be proud of who we are, to be proud of their Blackness. And it was hard because, again, not an experience that I've had myself, and yet one that was like, I want to just go in and just erase the memory from him and fix the thought process in the other child. And yet, all I could do was give information and support, and
Mm.
hope that in future situations he would remember that he's powerful how he is, he's beautiful how he is. And I don't know that that stuck with him, but it's a thing that all we can do is all we can do.
Yeah. And gosh, like to watch your kiddo, your heart outside of you kind of have to experience something like that, I imagine is just so, so difficult. And I'd love to kind of hear more about the real side, kind of what's going on in your brain when things like that happen, because we are here to talk about the real stories, right? At first, I've got a couple that are made. So am I just popping it in the oil? Walk me through this piece right here.
How big is are you using a pan, a wok?
I got a wok. I'm Asian. I have a wok.
You have a
Thank
wok.
you.
Yes.
Yes.
I usually do, like, I can do 4 to 6 depending on the size of the wok.
Okay.
If you can comfortably sit 6 in there, and then once they start to sort of turn like a light brownish,
Okay.
Then you're going to want to turn them so they get the same color on the other side. If you can see the ingredients through the egg roll wrapper, it's not done yet.
Okay. Good to know. So I'll pop mine in. And as I do that, I would love to kind of hear a little bit about when those things happen. Kind of, I hear you working really hard to kind of, um, show your kiddos the calm, kind of composed nature of how you want them to be able to respond when these things happen, when they experience these really kind of hurtful experiences. I'd like to know kind of for you as a parent, what's going on in your mind in that moment. Give us the dish on what's really happening behind the scenes for you and kind of how you're navigating that for yourself.
Right. So I definitely have a lot of choice words and sort of imagine the scenario where I go to the other parents and say, listen to the toxicity you're filling your child with, because now they're filling my child with it, and that's not okay.
Mm,
And
yeah.
anything that is making my child feel less than is not acceptable. And then there's the part of me that's like, you're never going to have that conversation because it's going to fall on deaf ears. And unfortunately, I can't change the parents' minds. So then what can I
Mm,
do? And so I will vent to people who may or may not understand where I'm coming from. One of my best friends is white with two blonde hair, blue-eyed beauties who would never have any idea the experiences that I have. And yet she will listen with a full heart and ask, what do you need right now? How can I be supportive? And kind of helping her to educate her children on diversity in the world and celebrating it is a thing that I know that I can do. And when I'm in experiences where other children, either in my classroom or friends of my kids, are having hard moments like that, those are places where I can step in and I can be supportive of them and I can build them up. So I do try to focus on the things that are within my control. I am also human. And so sometimes I'm just crying and venting and journaling and wishing that this wasn't real. And unfortunately, in the town where I am, there's a lot of, and I want to choose my words carefully. There's a lot of difference in how people think and entitlement, in that it's a free country kind of thing. Maybe for you it's a free country. It's not
mm,
yet for some of our kiddos, and that's where it's not okay. If you are sending your child to a school where it's supposed to be safe for all those children and your child is making it hard for other kids, what are we doing? Where and then it's like I'm raising my kids in this world where like I want to be worried about them falling off of their bikes. I don't want to be worried about them feeling like they do not belong, especially at school. And so I think then it's really me going back into my classroom and pouring that love into my students. And it's me reading books with my children that help them to see the beauty in who they are. It's me teaching them words of affirmation and then trying to remember to say them to myself as well, and having compassion for myself in those moments because I'm navigating uncharted territory and I don't know how to do it. I'm so lost. And so I think it's really kind of a combination of all those things, finding your support system, finding an outlet where you can vent, and then finding an action item that you can do that's going to move you and your family forward, and know that not everybody's going to get there. And I hate it.
yeah. I heard you mention kind of, and you pulled out kind of especially at school and the importance in fitting in there as well as it sounds like, feeling accepted in that. Why call that piece out as something, especially at school?
So our children spend more time at school than they do in their awake hours at home. They go to school expecting to learn something, expecting to be taken care of, and parents send their children to school expecting that they're going to be safe. And in our world today, where literally anything can go wrong in a school building, as we've seen, tragedy strikes within school buildings. And I am sending my kids to school hoping that they're going to be safe from natural disaster, from terrorism, from hate crime, and then in a place where they're with the same people all day long, people who know them, places where they're working on taking risks in being who they are and growing and recognizing their strengths and their areas for growth. That's where they're supposed to feel sheltered. They're supposed to feel safe. They're supposed to feel like this is a place where I can be and I don't have to be afraid and I know that I'm welcomed here. And that's the thing that I really strive for my own classroom to be. That's the reason I became an educator, was to help people feel safe where they were, celebrated about who they are, and give them the opportunity to grow right in front of me, right along with me, because I'm still growing. And I think I have really high expectations, not only as a parent, but as an educator, in knowing what I'm doing to make sure that other people's children are feeling safe. I want to know that the adults in the buildings where my children are doing their very best to make sure that they're feeling safe there too. And if it's
Yeah.
something where it's like, well, I didn't have any idea that this was going on, but why did you not have any
Mm.
idea? And I do understand that as a teacher, whether you have a class of 10 kids or 28, you don't catch everything.
Yeah.
But if you're taking the time to know your kids and you're establishing a place where they feel safe, then they should feel comfortable talking. And when they're comfortable talking, you will know and you
Mm.
find out things that you maybe don't see, but things that are happening that you can do something about, that you can make the environment feel safer for those people when they're feeling heard.
Yeah. I'm curious, like with your journey thus far, in kind of navigating these particular, you know, this particular journey that maybe doesn't look like everybody else's, is there any piece of it where you were looking at it and thinking, this isn't what I was told it was supposed to look like, or that, I was supposed to be doing right now, that you find kind of trying to come into your head, whether, it was from others, from society, from just your own upbringing, that you've found kind of yourself battling with and trying to navigate?
So I think I was a little naive when I was becoming a parent of mixed babies, because I thought they're going to be beautiful, they're going to be talented, they're going to be these amazing humans, and everyone's going
Which
to
they
love them.
are. I'd like to say that.
Yes, thank you so much. They are. And I think that I thought that was going to be enough. And
Mm.
for me, it is. I think I'm constantly looking for things that other people see as a flaw in my children. And when I do look for it, I find it. So sometimes I'll hear, even my mother sometimes will say things that she doesn't mean to be offensive in any way. And yet the impact that it has on me or on my children
Yeah.
is hurtful. And I think that's the case, unfortunately, with a lot of people, because they don't realize that the things that they're saying can be hurtful. And
Mm.
I think that was the thing I just wasn't really, I didn't think it was going to happen. And I was kind of like, oh, there's no way we're going to be in a place where our kids aren't just loved and celebrated. And all the time people are like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing. There are people who see things wrong in my kids, and I see wrong things in my kids. Of course, I see wrong in my kids. And yet, the wrong in them does not define who they are. And I have found other people defining children, adults too, but children, based on their behavior or based on a meltdown, based on a spontaneous decision to do a cartwheel in a parking lot. Like there's people, and people will associate those negative behaviors with the child's personality. And then it's like, well, it's because it's a single mom, or it's because they're mixed kids, it's because they're Black, it's because the parents aren't doing enough at home. All these things
Mm.
that, like, no, the kid just did a cartwheel in the parking lot. That has nothing to do with, actually, it does have something to do with who they are. They're they do parkour, like they're athletes, but there's a big piece of me who thinks they should just be able to be, and their people are going to love them no matter what. And yet, if you don't understand the whole child and you see one behavior and you automatically assume that that's what the life of the child is,
Mm-hmm.
then you're missing out on so much beauty in this world. And I feel like I see a lot of people noticing those things. And that's not just in my kids, I see it in students too, but it's definitely a thing that I didn't recognize before as, or maybe I saw it and didn't realize how problematic it was until it was my own kids.
Do you think for you there was like a really big moment that like that aha moment that some of these things started to click for you and maybe your perspective shifted?
I think it's kind of hearing something like, oh, well, that's just Dante. Or, well, that's just Xander. That's just how they are. That's just who they are in a negative concept, like context, sorry. Um,
Okay.
that have kind of made me think or realize that that was even a thing that people were doing. Um, Honestly, the hardest things to watch though were those moments when teachers were saying those things about students, and then my thought was, what if somebody is saying this about my kid? And no matter
Mm.
what student it is that's being talked about, that's somebody's child. And so I think it was really in the classroom, or in meetings rather, that I started to realize that that was happening. And that's when I feel like I became alert to it in my children, because it's it was kind of like, oh well, you're not going to get anything out of that kid. And then I'm like, challenge accepted. Like, let's go. But
Yeah.
I really think that it was a lot in the classroom that sort of opened my eyes to what was happening with my own children. And
Well,
sometimes it's just like, you know, I don't think that we can have Dante and Xander over here today because they don't clean up their wrappers when they eat something. And then my thought is, well, did you tell them pick up your wrappers? And if you don't, yes, we should assume that children just know. And also, children sometimes don't remember. And so if I say, pick up your wrapper, and they pick it up and go throw it away, problem solved. And then if it happens again and I say, hey, remember, we need to pick up that wrapper, but they don't do that piece. I feel like it's a lot of times when there's one thing that's done wrong, then it's like, yeah, no, we're not doing this anymore because they didn't X, Y, and Z, where a
mm.
conversation was not had with either them or myself to know that there was a problem in the first place. So we weren't necessarily given the opportunity to rectify it. And that's a frustrating piece too, that I also wasn't ready for. I just thought we all have conversations with people when stuff goes wrong and then we work to fix it. And that piece does not always happen either.
Yeah. And like you said, kind of almost as all or nothing, and it being kind of more of a character attack versus maybe some grace and some compassion for the fact that these are, kids that are 10 and under that are still learning and experiencing the world and figuring out what their place is in it, what it's like to be in the world, what it's like to have expectations, and be mindful. I mean, gosh, if our 10-year-olds, our 8-year-olds were able to be as mindful as we would want, that, I mean, goodness, there's adults that, I look at and go, I wish you were also practicing more mindfulness. But to have that expectation of these little kiddos and then have it be like an all or nothing definition, I can imagine is just, gosh, so hurtful as the parent who is working really hard to raise good human beings and ones that are celebrated and seen for their awesomeness. So I'm curious, are there any kind of insights or resources or things that if you could go back in time that you would tell yourself to prepare or to share with others that are maybe experiencing similar things? What would you share or give back in those ways?
I think this also applies to all parents, but in particular, I felt like I'm a mixed baby. I can handle raising mixed babies, and I was
Mm.
excited for it. And I was like, look how much diversity is going to live under my roof, and it was going to be amazing. And I think the thing that I really had to knock myself down a few pegs on was that I don't know everything that's going to happen. I don't, yes, I'm a mixed baby, but I'm not my children. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have all of the same experiences as them. So I think it's really being able to separate yourself from your tiny person and saying, I am not this person. I did not have this experience. So I think a lot of times something that's harmful is when parents say, like, oh, you're fine. Like, I've been there. I know what you're dealing with, and it's not the end of the world. Or, my, like, if I were to say to my kids, like, yeah, I was a mixed baby too. So I know mixed babies have issues in the school system. I don't know that because I didn't have those difficulties. I didn't have people saying hurtful things to me. I did have people using microaggressions that I didn't realize were microaggressions until I became educated on what they were, and some really
Hold on, before you
harmful.
move on, could you actually, for those that don't know what microaggressions are, can you just give us like a little snippet?
Yeah, of course. So a prime example is my kid's hair. Earlier, we talked about how he has dreads, right? And
Mm-hmm.
something that can be harmful to a child is when you're going, or to any person of color, is when you're treating them like what they are is not normal in a way that's not, like, you wouldn't do it to somebody else, right? So you wouldn't just go up to some random person and be like, oh my God, let me touch your hair. And people will do that too, lots of times, to Black people, because Black people have beautiful hair, A, and B, it's styled differently and it's different from what we expect. Because it's different from what we have, right? And so we want to
Yeah.
see it, we want to touch it, we want to feel it, but also, no, that's invading their personal space. And you would not go up to a white person and say, let me touch your hair, let me see your braids, like, is this real? Like, those kinds of things that you don't realize are harmful, and yet they
Yeah.
can be. Another
Mm.
example is, say when a person is talking and their dialect is different from yours, telling them that they're wrong, or telling them that they're in any way not educated because they're not using correct grammar, where correct grammar came from a book written by a bunch of white guys. Like, correct grammar where they were born or in their home exists, right? Like, their own ability to code switch is this superpower, right? Where I have to speak this way at school and this way at home, and I can merge the two sometimes, but it's really like knowing another language. And yet telling them that they're wrong about it is
Mm.
harmful, right? And that's another
Yeah.
thing where you don't think that you're doing anything wrong. A lot of times the microaggressions are rooted in what is considered the norm, but the norm, according to whom, is what we really need to think about. Where did this norm come from? And if this norm came from a group of white guys, that's not the norm, because not everybody is a group of white guys.
Yeah. And who makes you the authority, right, to determine the norm for somebody else's unique life and life experiences?
Right.
Absolutely. Um, and so I did not mean to cut you off. I thought that was super important. I wanted to make sure that our listeners, for those that aren't aware of what microaggressions are, could be a little bit more informed. So thank you for being willing to kind of take a slight detour there.
So I was thinking about this earlier, that so there were experiences that I've had too that also were harmful to me as a child, but I didn't realize it until I was an adult. So when I was in fourth grade, maybe, yeah, it was elementary school for sure. We had a cultural celebration day at school,
Okay.
and my teacher gave me a grass skirt and a lei to wear because I looked like I could be Hawaiian. And I
Mm. So
like,
we're working with assumptions there, right?
and did I wear it? Yeah, because I was in fourth grade and was like, cool, I get to wear this cool flower thing. But then I looked at pictures one day and I was like, oh my gosh, like, why did I think that was okay because nobody told me it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, no, like just because my eyes are slanted does not mean that I look Hawaiian. And also, what does it mean to look Hawaiian? And
Mm-hmm.
I think about this a lot when I'm teaching in Spanish because somebody will look at people and be like, that person's not Spanish. Well, first of all, no, they're from Puerto Rico. That's not Spanish. They're Puerto Rican, but they speak Spanish. No, they don't. That girl has blonde hair. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of times these like those assumptions that are being made and then the generalization and saying like, oh, well, slanted eyes, you could be Hawaiian, or are you Chinese or Japanese?
Mm.
See, none of the above. Like,
Right.
what? Why is it only one or the other? And I think that's a huge thing that I didn't I grew up thinking, okay, like nobody knows any better. And then I grew up and I was like, how come nobody knows any better?
Mm.
That's not okay. Like, what is that? And so I think it's just that piece of like really educating yourself on who people are and knowing that it's they can be celebrated in ways that are exciting for them and that make them feel like this is me and I love who I am and I want to share this with you rather than a thing where that they feel like they have to like kind of hold back and not be able to share. So I think it's kind of
Yeah.
twofold when you ask me about, what are those things that I want to tell other people? It's really know who the people are and
Mm-hmm.
celebrate them and also recognize that your experience is not the same as theirs.
Yeah. And almost sounds like I wonder if, part of that is starting and figuring out kind of what your own biases are first and figuring out, what does that look like in your lens and then being able to then have that conversation with your kiddos because I imagine that's a really hard conversation to have if you're not even your own biases and kind of what's going on based off of your own experiences, your own life, what you've been taught, etc. You're not completely cognizant of and you're just kind of going through life like you said because I don't know any different, this is all I've seen, and so I didn't know that this was you know inappropriate or whatnot. It sounds like it could be really beneficial.
Mhm. I think
So,
a lot of times too, we look at, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no, you're good. Go for it. I'd love to hear it.
So I'm thinking about a lot of times we think too, like what can I say that's going to be the right thing to say, right? Or you're
Mm,
like, I'm afraid to talk because I don't want to be offensive, or I don't want to ask the questions because it's not their job to educate me. I need to go and get educated myself. So some of the conversations that we need to have with ourselves are those that maybe you need a journaling page. I actually have a journal that I can send your way that's like I want to say it's like 8 pages maybe that have different ways to kind of dive into who you are in terms of your cultural identity. And then
okay.
once you're kind of feeling like, okay, I'm comfortable with, recognizing who I am and talking about the ways that I represent myself, the ways that I celebrate who I am, now I can start to look at how I'm looking at other people. And there
Mm,
are unconscious biases tests that you can take online where it's like a series of images and it asks you to choose based on specific questions or stereotypes and things like that, where it's like, which person looks like they would be friendly, which person looks like they would be dangerous, who would you be afraid of? I think that the big thing is being honest with yourself when you're having those conversations or doing those journaling pages or taking those tests, really answering them truthfully, because I think a lot of times we know that something is wrong. So we
hmm
speak around it to say, oh, well, I know that I would be afraid of this person, but if I say that, I'm going to sound racist. So I need to not say that. So you choose differently. And that's not an honest conversation with yourself. You're recognizing that you have that unconscious bias, but you're avoiding it by answering how you think somebody wants you to answer.
mm,
And then you're
yeah,
saying, oh, well, I don't have any unconscious biases, or
I'm
the
great.
results don't hold true to what you're actually experiencing.
Yeah, Absolutely. That's a great resource, and I'd love to link it down too. So again, all those things for those folks that are listening, we'll make sure get included in our show notes, because those are great resources to be able to start changing this conversation and hopefully making this place, leaving this place a better world than when we got here. And helping kind of rewrite some of these journeys that our neighbors right next to us or you yourself might be experiencing, and people are unaware because there's not enough conversation about these things. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to have these conversations, to pull back that curtain. So here is my product. Hopefully it does well. Oh goodness. Is this kind of what we're looking for?
Yes, no. So yes, but also
Did I
I
fold
think
it differently?
I would have rolled it in so that it was like the flap was along the roll of the egg roll. Yours, it looked like cute little purses.
Yeah, they're like little envelopes.
Yes,
Hey, it's my interpretation of it.
it's exactly what you were going for, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so I saw some like that on a couple of the pictures that I saw, and I was like, oh my gosh, are we doing them wrong? Because at my house, like I will roll them like an egg roll. My mom will make them flat, but more like yours that look like an envelope, but like a rectangle rather than like the square pocket. And so again, it's how you how you do it is how you do it, and it's going to be packed with the same delicious flavor. But I love that it's like, here are my directions for them. Here is your interpretation of them, and this is what they look like. And I'm like, oh no, that's not how I make them. But also, they're gonna be delicious.
Yeah, and hey, I can just put it in my little pocket. So all that to say, the basic, that's how we are, right? The basic materials of us are fairly similar. At the same time, we all are unique and different, and we're all just as amazing as the next. So that's my spin on it.
I love it.
Well, Sara, thank you so much for being willing to chat with us today and share a little bit about your story and your experience here on The Real Family Eats. So thank you. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.